Hey guys, I'm Sydney Mary, and this is Retired College Athletes, a platform designed to inspire and inform current and former athletes through stories and advice from retired college athletes. And today we're discussing all about food insecurity and how it does affect college athletes. So let's go ahead and jump into today's video. All right, guys, so as usual, we had a podcast episode that went up not too long ago. And again, if you don't know that we have a podcast, we do. So I'll have a link in the description box below for you to go ahead and check it out. We post on the podcast every Monday and Thursday. So go ahead and check us out over there. But today we're talking about an episode that we had around food insecurity with Susana Meléndez. She is a registered dietitian who currently is a dietitian at a college. So she definitely helps a lot of college athletes navigate that realm of food and how to fuel your bodies. But we had this conversation on food insecurity because I feel like it doesn't come up that often. People don't realize that food insecurity affects a whole host of people, including college athletes. So in here, we're going to go ahead and talk about what it is and how we can help athletes navigate this. So here's Susana talking about what exactly food insecurity is.
So just to start with the definition, the USDA defines it as like limited or uncertain availability of nutritionally adequate or safe food. And or the ability to acquire any food in a socially acceptable manner. That just pretty much means it's difficult for you to acquire food that is going to, maybe as an athlete, help with enhancing your performance, or as a non-athlete or retired athlete, perhaps just keep you on the right path towards health and wellness that you're searching for. And then the inability to acquire it. So maybe you're in an area of town where you're in a food desert. There's a lot of fast food around you, and the nearest grocery store is maybe miles away. So it's kind of a blend of those two. And I think with athletes specifically, food insecurity is sort of difficult because it can affect anyone. It can affect a young child. It can affect the parents. It can then affect, a high school athlete, a collegiate athlete. It does not discriminate. And with college athletes specifically, I would say that generally need those higher caloric intakes. I think it makes it very difficult to kind of aid in helping them meet their performance needs because they're missing all of those calories, right? And that can lead to poor eating habits, anxiety, unwanted stressors, and that ultimately will lead to further down the line to health challenges, right? Because we have the wrong habits kind of set in place and going on further down our athletic career and into retirement, into adulthood, if you will.
Okay, so now that we know what food insecurity is, I think it's important to know that anybody can be affected by food insecurity. It's just literally the absence of having food when you need it. And that is something that college athletes can go through too. Now, one thing I have realized is that people think that because athletes are on meal plans, that this is not true, but that's not the case. And here is why. According to research from Hope for College, it shows that 21% of student athletes that are on meal plans experience food insecurity. And I think that this is interesting because oftentimes meal plans are what is seen as like, okay, this is a solve for everything. Like if a student's
Right.
if a student athlete's on a meal plan, like they'll have food. Usually you have points at some schools and they'll be fine. But
Mhm.
that is definitely the case. And so for many people, they do believe that meal plans can solve everything. Can you explain how this phenomenon might take place at a school, like at any college?
Right. So that is a huge misconception. And I bet you remember back in your playing days where you went to the kind of, to take us both back, you went into your dining hall and you walked in, you sat down and you ate what you could, and then you moved on with life, right? And then later maybe you had time to come back, and then you ate what you could, and then you moved on. So what happens with a lot of athletes is they don't really know how many calories they're taking in. And something else that you need to consider, right, if you're going into a dining hall, is that the average athlete, at least football, and I work with other sports as well. So think of the amount of calories needed during a season, or maybe during a difficult off season. I mean, it can be upwards of like 6,000 calories for some athletes. So if you consider that an athlete can't just sit in there and inhale, 2,000 calories at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, I mean, that makes it super complicated to meet those needs. On top of, going back, and if you're an athlete now, how many times do you have to skip a meal because you have class or you have film or you have at like meeting with the trainer, meeting with the dietitian, or you have practice. A lot of practices are scheduled early in the morning and they're several hours or later in the evening or in the afternoon. So what I found with my athletes is most of the time there's at least one meal a day that they're missing, which now drops our calorie allotment to about maybe 3/4 of what we needed. And even then, it's hard for them to go in and it's difficult to sit down and consume that much and then still go on about your day. So you can't really go in, have breakfast, and then run to practice and run around on your 2,000 calories that you needed at that meal. So it's difficult to get the amount of calories. And I think that's where fueling stations really help. And that's where snacks really help to kind of bridge that gap. And that's where that dietitian role kind of comes in, to bridge that gap so that athletes don't have to feel like, oh no, the food's going to run out. I need to eat as much as I can. And then, maybe go to practice full, but what am I going to do?
Okay, so now that we know multiple demographics of people can be affected, is there one demographic or a few that are more highly affected by food insecurity? And there is.
I've been at quite a few schools, and there was, at first I was thinking, okay, maybe I'm just seeing things. I definitely, personal belief, see it more often in my female athletes. I'm not quite sure why, if there's a weight stigma behind it, maybe. But something that I was super surprised with when I was doing research, I'm writing a piece right now for food insecurity that I'm working on. So when I was doing research for it, I found a 2017 University of California. They did this like global food initiative. And in that came out that 56% of like first generation students reported that they had experienced food insecurity, as opposed to only, that would be 35% of those who weren't first generation. So, I mean, that goes back to the whole concept of growing up with a family that maybe didn't have the means to provide food security, or to be stable in that aspect of food security. And I think that same study also looked at homelessness. So the two were very correlated. So that's the first one, I think. And now that I have read, I don't know if I'm biased, but now that I have read that, I'm actually looking for it a little bit more. So I'll ask the athletes if they're first generation, if they'd like to share. And sure enough, most of the time it is my first generation athletes.
So, yes, food insecurity is a problem. Yes, college athletes can be affected by food insecurity, and so could a lot of other people. But there are definitely resources that can help combat food insecurity, whether it's a food pantry on your campus or just tapping into other resources in your community. There are ways to get around this, or hopefully just ameliorate like the effects of food insecurity. But outside of that, there are many ways that dietitians themselves can help these athletes or whoever they're serving figure out and navigate the situation.
My next question is basically, are there things that nutritionists can do to work with athletes and universities to kind of help solve this problem?
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest one is connecting an athlete to a resource. So that's going to be the biggest one. So I know, I'm not sure if you did. I didn't really understand the concept of a food pantry when I was in college. I knew we had one, but even when I was hungry, all I could think of, and this is something I hear my athletes say, all I could think of was, that's not for me. I'm hungry, but I don't like, that's for people who really need that. I don't know if that happened to you ever, like you felt kind of guilty for doing something like that. But
That's interesting.
anyway,
Yeah.
yeah.
Actually, the funny thing is, like, while I was in college, I didn't really like, I never sought that out in the area because I didn't know that they existed. And it was always just kind of like a charitable
Yeah.
thing. So I was like, I don't need
Yeah.
charity.
Yeah. And that's such a common, thought with athletes. Like I'll suggest the food, we have a food pantry on campus. And they said, well, isn't that just for normal, college students? Like you're also a college student. That service is available to you as well. And they'll even argue with me and say, well, no, I don't think I want to take that food from someone. And I'm thinking, okay, let's talk about how many calories you need. And even if you have a scholarship, your scholarship can only cover maybe half of those calories. So you are in need. And maybe, your parents can't be a safety net for you. So you're definitely in need of that, extra what $15 of eggs and assistance and like canned soup. You can use that for sure. So I think the resource bit is super important. There's a lot of programs depending on the state that you're in. I know there's local food banks and like community kitchens as well.
So the bottom line is that food insecurity happens. It does not discriminate. It does not care if you're an athlete or if you're a mom, if you're a parent. It doesn't care. Really, it will happen to anybody. And so making sure that you know what it looks like, making sure that you understand resources if it's happening to you and what you can tap into. And if you're a dietitian, how you can help your student athletes or whoever you're serving navigate this. It's super important. With that said, I'm super thankful to Susana for coming on the podcast and ultimately allowing me to have this on YouTube. I think this is really important information that a lot of people need to know, and I'm glad we could have it here. If you learned something, if you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell notification so you don't miss a video from me. I put out content here every Thursday on topics similar to this, anything that is affecting student athletes and retired student athletes. So if you like this content, again, please subscribe. We'd love to have you a part of this community. With that said, that's all I have for today, and I'll see you guys next week.